Look at this, a half pint trying to play soldier. I bet you got your uniform from the kids section. Someone get her a juice box before she faints from carrying that tray. The voice of Sergeant Rex Thorne boomed across the Fort Sheridan mess hall, a shockwave of casual cruelty that silenced the usual clatter of forks and low conversation. The crowd, a sea of green and tan uniforms, rippled with nervous laughter. It was the easy, complicit laughter of those who are glad the predator's gaze has fallen on someone else. Specialist Anna Morgan did not flinch. She did not look up. Her focus remained entirely on the task at hand, navigating the crowded space to find an empty table. Her movements were economical, her posture straight but unassuming, a small, quiet island in the churning sea of Thorne's manufactured drama. He had targeted her for the same reason a wolf targets the quietest member of the herd. Not because it is the weakest, but because its silence is mistaken for weakness, an unforgivable sin in a world that runs on noise and bravado. But the base's commanding officer, General Marcus Vance, observing from a secluded table in the corner with his senior staff, saw something else entirely. He didn't see a half pint. He saw a discipline in her stillness that was more profound than all of Thorne's bluster. He saw the way her eyes scanned the room, not with fear, but with a detached, analytical calm, assessing patterns and pathways. It was a gaze he had seen before, in places the official histories would never mention, in the eyes of people whose names were buried under layers of classification. It was the calm of the hurricanes, a terrifying serenity that hinted at immense, controlled power. Thorne, emboldened by the laughter, stepped directly into her path, his massive frame a wall of arrogant flesh. He smirked, enjoying the spectacle, enjoying the public exercise of his petty authority. Morgan stopped, her tray held perfectly level, her expression a blank slate of professional neutrality. She was a ghost in the machine, a functionary, and this loud, angry man was merely a temporary obstruction in the system. If you believe that true strength is measured not in the volume of the voice, but in the weight of one's actions, type competence below, because the lesson Sergeant Thorne was about to learn would be etched into the very soul of Fort Sheridan. The silence in the mess hall stretched, becoming a tangible thing, a heavy blanket of anticipation. Every eye was now fixed on the confrontation, a tableau of David and Goliath rendered in modern camouflage. The difference, however, was that this David had no slingshot, no visible weapon at all. Her power was of a different sort, an invisible force field of sheer, unadulterated professionalism that Thorne's insults couldn't penetrate. He saw a small woman, barely 5'3", with a face that seemed too young for the uniform. Her sandy hair pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it seemed to pull the emotion from her features. He saw what his prejudice wanted him to see. A diversity hire, a checkbox ticked, someone who had slipped through the cracks of a system he believed should be forged in fire and brute force, not quiet intellect. "What's the matter, specialist? Cat got your tongue?" He sneered, leaning in, his voice a conspiratorial stage whisper that carried to every corner of the hall. "Or did the recruiter forget to issue you a spine along with your dog tags?" He gestured dismissively at her tray, a meticulously balanced meal of lean protein, vegetables, and a single carton of milk. "Gotta get your calcium, right? Build those little bones up." He then committed the act that would seal his fate. With a contemptuous flick of his boot, he kicked the corner of her duffel bag, which she had placed neatly on the floor beside her. It wasn't a violent kick, but it was profoundly disrespectful, an act of public degradation designed to shatter her composure and affirm his dominance. The bag, containing a heavy, specialized laptop and several hardened drives, skidded a few feet across the linoleum, the sound unnaturally loud in the now deafening quiet. Still, she did not react. Her gaze remained fixed on the middle distance, her body a statue of composure. It was this absolute lack of response that was so unnerving. She didn't gasp, she didn't glare, she didn't even sigh. It was as if Thorne was a ghost, a phantom of no consequence, a mild atmospheric disturbance she was simply waiting to pass. This infuriated him more than any outburst could have. He was being erased, rendered irrelevant by her silence. He had thrown his best punch, and it had passed right through her. The onlookers felt it too. The nervous laughter died in their throats, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. They had expected a drama, a tearful retreat, or a clumsy retort. They had not expected this. This was something alien, something that didn't fit the established social hierarchy of the base. It was the quiet of a bomb disposal expert studying a complex trigger, the calm of a surgeon before the first incision. It was the absolute certainty of competence, a force more powerful and intimidating than any shouted insult. In that moment, Morgan wasn't just a soldier. She was a living embodiment of a code that Thorne had long forgotten. The loudest one in the room is often the weakest. She bent down, a single fluid motion of perfect economy, retrieved her bag, checked it with a brief professional glance, and then, without so much as a look in his direction, continued on her path to an empty table as if he had never existed at all. The entire mess hall held its breath, sensing that this was not an ending, but the beginning of a reckoning. The reckoning arrived precisely 3 hours later, not with a whimper, but with the shriek of every alarm on Fort Sheridan. The klaxons wailed, a synthetic, pulsing scream that clawed at the nerves. Red lights strobed down corridors, painting the world in frantic flashes of crimson. Over the intercom, a digitized voice, stripped of all human inflection, repeated a chilling mantra, code red. Gridlock protocol engaged. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. It was a sophisticated cyber attack, a digital blitzkrieg launched by an unknown state-level actor. The base's entire digital infrastructure, from its communication arrays to its automated defense turrets, was being systematically dismantled by a hostile AI. Firewalls were melting like sandcastles. Encrypted networks were being pried open, and the command and control system was flickering like a dying candle in a hurricane. In the Strategic Operations Center, the air was thick with a metallic tang of sweat and fear. Technicians, the best the Army had to offer, scrambled over keyboards, their faces illuminated by waterfalls of cascading, corrupted code. They were losing, badly. The enemy was a ghost, a phantom in the machine that anticipated their every move, countering their defenses before they were even fully implemented. General Vance stood on the command deck, his face a granite mask, watching the digital map of his base crumble piece by piece. "Where's the bleed coming from?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the panic. "Everywhere, sir," a frantic major replied, his hands flying across a holographic interface. "It's not an intrusion, it's a possession. They're not in the system, they are the system. We can't firewall what we can't find. We have maybe 5 minutes before they achieve total network collapse. At that point, they'll control our arsenal." It was in that moment of absolute crisis, as the digital heart of the base flatlined, that Specialist Anna Morgan entered the SOC. She moved with the same unhurried, deliberate grace she had shown in the mess hall. While others ran, she walked. While others shouted, she was silent. She carried the duffel bag Thorne had kicked, now unzipped to reveal a matte black, non-regulation laptop bristling with custom ports. She didn't wait for orders. She didn't ask for permission. She moved to an auxiliary terminal, a forgotten diagnostic port in the corner of the room, and began to work. Her fingers didn't just type, they danced. They moved with a speed and precision that was hypnotic, a blur of practice motion that spoke of thousands of hours spent in the digital trenches. She wasn't fighting the enemy AI on its own terms. She was doing something far more audacious. She was performing open-heart surgery on the base's core programming while the patient was still crashing. She wasn't trying to build new walls. She was rewriting the very laws of physics within the digital universe, recoding the foundational protocols to make the environment itself hostile to the invading entity. Sergeant Thorne, who had been assigned to SOC security, watched from the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. He saw the same woman he had belittled just hours before, now the calm center of a technological storm, her quiet competence a stark rebuke to his loud ignorance. He watched as lines of pristine, elegant code, her code, began to appear on the main screen, a silver thread of order in a maelstrom of chaos. She was not just a soldier, she was a weapon, and the battlefield was a place he couldn't even comprehend. Her preparation was a study in practiced ritual, a symphony of silent efficiency that stood in stark, defiant contrast to the rising tide of panic that was beginning to swamp the command center. She didn't tear open her bag. She unzipped it with a single, smooth pull. She didn't slam her laptop onto the console. She placed it with the care of a librarian handling a priceless manuscript. From the side pockets of the duffel, she produced a series of custom-built hardware keys, strange, alien-looking devices that resembled crystalline circuit boards. Each one was slotted into a port on her machine with a soft, satisfying click. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every action was the result of a muscle memory so deeply ingrained it had become instinct. It was the economy of movement that only comes from true mastery, the kind that makes the impossibly difficult look effortlessly simple. While the base's highly trained cyber warfare officers were throwing frantic, brute force countermeasures at the invading code, like throwing rocks at a phantom, Morgan was doing something far more subtle and profound. She wasn't fighting the attack. She was deconstructing it. Her screen was not a flurry of defensive algorithms, but a calm, methodical dissection of the enemy's source code, which she had somehow managed to isolate and mirror on her local machine. It was like watching a bomb maker dismantle their own creation in reverse. The other technicians saw only gibberish, a chaotic digital storm. Morgan saw a language. She saw the syntax of the attack, the grammar of the hostile AI, the hidden poetry in its destructive logic. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not in a panic, but with the rhythmic certainty of a concert pianist. She wasn't just typing. She was composing. She was writing a counter-narrative, a single, perfect line of code that would not block the virus, but instead would use the virus's own logic against itself, tricking it into tying itself into an inescapable knot. It was a digital judo throw, a move of such elegance and intellectual audacity that no one in the room could even begin to comprehend it. On the main view screen, the cascading red error messages began to slow. The digital map, which had been blinking out section by section, stabilized. A single green line of code, Morgan's code, appeared at the bottom of the screen. It was a simple 14-character string. It pulsed once, then twice. A collective gasp went through the room. The enemy AI, a multi-million-dollar piece of state-sponsored weaponry, was suddenly and inexplicably frozen. It had been trapped in a recursive loop, a logical paradox from which it could never escape. It was the digital equivalent of being locked in a room where the only key is also locked in the room. In the ensuing silence, a silence more profound and complete than any sound, Morgan executed one final command. A new window opened on the main screen, displaying a single set of GPS coordinates, pinpointing the physical location of the server farm that had launched the attack. She had not only stopped the assault, she had traced the untraceable, found the ghost, and delivered its home address. She then closed her laptop, packed her hardware keys away with the same methodical calm, and stood up, her work complete. The entire event, from her sitting down to the complete neutralization of a threat that had brought a multi-billion-dollar military installation to its knees, had taken exactly 4 minutes and 28 seconds. The room remained utterly silent, the only sound the gentle hum of the now stable servers. Every single person, from the frantic major to the stoic general, stared at her, their expressions a mixture of awe, shock, and a dawning, profound sense of humility. Sergeant Thorne, standing by the door, felt the blood drain from his face. His world had just been turned upside down. The half-pint he had tried to humiliate was not just a soldier. She was a force of nature. The silence in the Strategic Operations Center was a living entity. It was heavy, thick with the unasked questions and unspoken apologies of 24 highly trained professionals who had just witnessed a miracle. They had been passengers on a crashing plane, resigned to their fate, only to watch as a quiet woman in the back row walked to the cockpit, landed the plane with a dead stick on a carrier deck in a hurricane, and then walked away as if it were nothing. They were staring at Specialist Anna Morgan, but they weren't seeing her anymore. They were seeing the impossible thing she had just done. Her anonymity had been vaporized, replaced by an aura of almost mythic competence. She stood by the console, her posture unchanged, her expression still a mask of professional neutrality, waiting for a dismissal that she knew was coming. It was General Vance who finally broke the spell. He walked down from the command platform, his boots making slow, deliberate sounds on the metal floor. Every eye followed him. He didn't look at the screens, now displaying a stable, green-lit network. He didn't look at his stunned command staff. He walked directly to Morgan, his gaze intense, analytical, and filled with a dawning recognition. He stopped a respectful 2 feet in front of her. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and in his eyes, there was a flash of memory, a connection being made across years and continents. He had seen that surgical precision before, that absolute calm under unimaginable pressure. It was a signature, a trademark of a unit so secret that its existence was officially denied. Specialist, he began, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of his rank to every corner of the room. Please state your full name and previous unit of assignment for the record. It was a formal request, but it was more than that. It was an invitation for the truth to finally come to light. Morgan's response was immediate, crisp, and devoid of any emotion. Specialist Anna Morgan, sir. Last assignment was with the 7th Special Operations Cyber Division. A low murmur rippled through the room. The 7th SOCED was a legend, a ghost story that senior NCOs told to scare new recruits. They were the Phantoms, the Army's elite unit of digital warriors, hackers and coders recruited from the highest echelons of MIT and the darkest corners of the web. They were the invisible fist of American military power, capable of dismantling a nation's infrastructure with a few lines of code. They didn't exist, and yet, here was one of them, standing in a standard uniform, having just saved them all. Vance nodded slowly, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I see, he said. He then turned to his aide. Major, pull up Specialist Morgan's service record. Full clearance. Omega level. The Major, fumbling slightly with his tablet, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline, typed in the authorization codes. The file that appeared on the main screen caused another wave of silent shock to pass through the SOC. It was a litany of impossible achievements, a career that belonged in a spy novel, not to the quiet woman standing before them. Unit, 7th Special Operations Cyber Division, the Phantoms. Combat deployments, 14, all classified. Medals, Distinguished Service Cross, for extraordinary heroism in dismantling a hostile nation's command and control network during active combat, preventing a catastrophic missile launch. Silver Star. Bronze Star with V4 Valor. Purple Heart. Mission classifications, all listed as top secret /SCI/Project Omega. It was the resume of a living legend, hidden in plain sight. The weight of the information on the screen settled over the room, crushing the last vestiges of arrogance and assumption. Sergeant Thorne, who had remained frozen by the door, felt a cold dread wash over him. His earlier words in the mess hall replayed in his mind, each syllable now a testament to his own monumental ignorance. Juice box, half pint, no spine. He had not just insulted a fellow soldier. He had mocked one of the most decorated and lethal assets in the entire United States military. He had stood on a beach and made fun of a tsunami. The profound depth of his mistake was so vast, it was almost incomprehensible. He had judged the book by its cover, and the cover was a deliberate, calculated act of camouflage. Morgan's unassuming appearance wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. It was the ultimate stealth technology, allowing her to move through the world unseen, unremarked, and utterly underestimated until the moment she chose to strike. General Vance let the silence hang for another moment, allowing the full impact of the reveal to sink in. He wanted them to feel it. He wanted them to understand the chasm that exists between perception and reality, between assumption and truth. Then, he turned to face Morgan again. His posture shifted. The casual authority of a base commander was gone, replaced by something else entirely, a deep, profound, and formal respect. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. In a motion as crisp and precise as a rifle shot, he raised his hand to his brow in a formal salute. It was not the perfunctory salute a general gives a subordinate. It was the salute of a warrior acknowledging a warrior of equal, or perhaps even greater, standing. It was a gesture that shattered every protocol of rank and hierarchy. A 4-star general was saluting a specialist, and in that single, powerful act, he was correcting the cosmic injustice that had occurred in the mess hall. He was restoring order, not of rank, but of worth. Specialist Morgan, he said, his voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. On behalf of this entire command, I thank you for your service. Your actions today saved this base and everyone on it. We are in your debt. He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. Morgan, for the first time, showed a flicker of reaction, a subtle shift in her posture, a slight raising of her chin. She returned the salute, her own movement economical and perfect. Just doing my job, sir, she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent room, it echoed like a thunderclap. Vance then lowered his hand and turned his gaze upon the rest of the room. His eyes were like chips of ice. They swept over the stunned technicians, the humbled majors, and finally, they landed on Sergeant Rex Thorne. The look he gave the sergeant was not one of anger. It was worse. It was a look of profound disappointment and pity. Sergeant Thorne, the general said, his voice dangerously soft. My office. Now, he then turned back to the room. Let what happened here today, in this room and in the mess hall, be a lesson to every single one of you. The measure of soldier is not their size, their voice, or your assumptions. It is their competence. It is their character. Dismissed, as Thorne began the long, lonely walk of shame towards the general's office, two military policemen quietly entered the SOC. They moved with a grim purpose, their faces impassive. They flanked the sergeant, their presence a clear and ominous sign. His career at Fort Sheridan was over. His lesson, however, was just beginning. The story of what happened in the mess hall and the Strategic Operations Center spread through Fort Sheridan like a wildfire in a dry canyon. It didn't travel through official channels or after-action reports. It moved through the base's true information network, the whispers in the barracks after lights out, the hushed conversations in the smoke pits, the knowing glances exchanged over greasy trays in the chow line. It became a legend almost overnight, a piece of institutional folklore passed from soldier to soldier, growing slightly with each telling, but always retaining its essential, shocking truth. The tale was given a name, the Morgan Correction. It served as a powerful, cautionary parable against the sin of assumption. New recruits arriving at the base were told the story by their drill sergeants as a fundamental lesson in military life. You never know who you're standing next to. That quiet guy in logistics might be a former Delta operator. That small woman in admin might be able to dismantle a satellite network with a laptop. Show respect to everyone, not because of their rank, but because of their uniform. The story had a transformative effect on the base's culture. The casual bullying and loud-mouthed posturing that had once been a background hum of daily life began to fade, replaced by a more watchful, more respectful quiet. People started looking at each other differently, wondering what hidden depths, what secret histories lay behind the faces they saw every day. Sergeant Thorne was not, as many had expected, dishonorably discharged. General Vance, in a moment of wisdom, believed that true punishment was not expulsion, but education. Thorne was demoted to private and reassigned to the most menial tasks on the base, cleaning latrines, peeling potatoes, sorting mail. But the real punishment was the daily, silent judgment in the eyes of his fellow soldiers. He was a living ghost, a walking reminder of the price of arrogance. He had to face the woman he had belittled every single day. He saw her in the mess hall, sitting alone, eating her meal with the same focused calm. He saw her walking to the comms building, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. He saw her, and he saw the embodiment of his own failure. The change in him was slow, but it was profound. The bluster and bravado were stripped away, layer by layer, until all that was left was a humbled, broken man. He began to learn the value of silence, of observation. He started to see the world not as a stage for his own ego, but as a complex system full of quiet professionals he had never bothered to notice before. His journey to redemption would be a long one, but it had begun. He was finally learning the lesson that Anna Morgan had taught the entire base without saying more than a dozen words. The legend of the Morgan Correction became so ingrained in the fabric of Fort Sheridan that it eventually took on a physical form. A few weeks after the incident, an anonymous user on the base's internal network posted a simple, pixelated image. It was a still from the SOC's security camera footage, capturing the exact moment General Vance was saluting Specialist Morgan. The image was grainy, the lighting poor, but the power of the moment was undeniable. The towering four-star general, his hand raised in a gesture of ultimate respect to the small, unassuming specialist. Beneath the image was a single line of text. Competence is the only rank that matters. The image went viral. Within hours, it was the desktop background on half the computers on the base. Someone printed it out and pinned it to the bulletin board in the mess hall, right above the table where Morgan usually sat. No one ever took it down. It became a permanent fixture, a silent testament to the day a quiet professional reminded an entire army what true strength looked like. Sergeant Thorne, now Private Thorne, saw the picture every day during his cleaning duties. Each time, it was a fresh stab of shame, but also a reminder of the lesson he was slowly, painfully internalizing. One evening, after his shift, he saw Morgan leaving the comms building. He knew this was his moment, the one he'd been dreading and rehearsing in his mind for weeks. He took a deep breath and approached her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Specialist Morgan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She stopped and turned, her expression as neutral as ever. "Thorne." He flinched at the use of his name without a rank. It was not an insult. It was a simple statement of fact. He was no longer a sergeant. He was just Thorne. "Ma'am," he began, the word feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. I wanted to apologize for what I did in the mess hall. There's no excuse for it. I was arrogant. I was ignorant. And I was wrong. Completely and totally wrong." He stood there, his head bowed, waiting for her response. He expected anger or dismissal, or perhaps even a cold satisfaction. He did not expect what came next. She simply looked at him for a long moment, her analytical gaze seeming to peel back the layers of his pathetic apology and see the genuine remorse beneath. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Assumptions are a liability, Thorne," she said, her voice soft. "Lose them. It'll make you a better soldier." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the twilight. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was something more valuable. It was a diagnosis and a prescription. It was a piece of professional advice from a master of her craft. For the first time in a long time, Thorne felt a flicker of something other than shame. It was a flicker of hope. Morgan, for her part, remained unchanged by the events. The newfound reverence from her fellow soldiers was an unwelcome distraction. She deflected their praise, ignored their whispers, and continued her work with the same silent, focused dedication. She was a professional. The mission was all that mattered. But she did make one small change. She began to mentor a small group of young cyber warfare trainees, teaching them not just the technical skills of her trade, but the philosophy that underpinned it. That silence is a tool, that ego is a vulnerability, and that true power lies not in being the loudest voice in the room, but in being the most competent mind. A year passed. Fort Sheridan was a different place. The cultural shift that began with a Morgan correction had solidified, becoming the new standard. The base was quieter, more efficient, more professional. The lesson had been absorbed into the institutional DNA. New soldiers arriving for their first posting would be taken to the mess hall, and an NCO, sometimes a newly re-promoted Corporal Thorne, would point to the grainy photo still pinned to the bulletin board. They would tell the story not as a piece of gossip, but as a core tenet of their unit's philosophy. They spoke of Specialist Morgan, who was no longer on the base, having been reassigned to another classified post on the other side of the world, a ghost moving on to the next silent war. But her presence remained. It was in the respectful nod given to the quiet supply clerk. It was in the patience shown to the young private struggling with a new system. It was in the understanding that the soldier polishing the floors might be just as vital to the mission as the pilot flying the jet. The story had become a legacy, a living principle that guided their actions. It taught them that respect is not a gift to be given based on rank or appearance, but a debt owed to the shared uniform and the competence it represents. It reminded them that the most dangerous threats often come not from the enemy without, but from the arrogance and prejudice within. General Vance, nearing retirement, often reflected on that day. He considered it one of the most important moments of his command. He hadn't just witnessed the neutralization of a cyber attack. He had witnessed the powerful, undeniable triumph of character over ego. He saw how one person's quiet, unwavering competence could recalibrate an entire culture, proving that true leadership is not about making the most noise, but about setting the clearest example. The legacy of Anna Morgan wasn't in the code she wrote or the attack she stopped. It was in the change she inspired. It was in the way a once arrogant sergeant learned humility by scrubbing floors. It was in the way a young technician learned to listen to the quietest voice in the room. It was in the way an entire military base learned that the deadliest weapon in their arsenal was not a missile or a tank, but the silent, disciplined professional who seeks no credit and fears no challenge. True legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It's the story others tell about you after you've gone. It's the lesson that endures, the standard that is upheld, the quiet competence that continues to echo long after the work is done. Anna Morgan had left Fort Sheridan, but her legend was just beginning, a permanent part of its honor, its history, and its soul. The ripples of that single day continued to expand, creating a lasting and profound impact that went far beyond the gates of Fort Sheridan. The story, stripped of its classified details, became a case study at West Point and other military academies. A modern fable used to teach new officers about the dangers of cognitive bias and the critical importance of judging soldiers by their demonstrated abilities rather than by preconceived notions. The term pulling a Morgan entered the unofficial lexicon of the armed forces, used to describe a situation where a quiet, underestimated individual suddenly reveals a shocking level of elite skill, silencing skeptics and saving the day. It became a badge of honor, a celebration of the quiet professionals who form the true backbone of the military. Corporal Thorne, against all odds, continued his slow climb back up the ranks. The man who had been a caricature of arrogance was now a model of quiet humility and mentorship. He was harder on his soldiers than he had ever been, but not in the way he was before. He demanded precision, he demanded discipline, and above all, he demanded that they treat every single person on the base with a fundamental level of professional respect. He would often tell them, "The person you dismiss today might be the one you're counting on to save your life tomorrow. Don't be the fool he never lost the shame of that day. But he had managed to transform it into a tool for building better soldiers, a testament to the fact that even the most profound failures can be redeemed through genuine change." The world continued to spin, and the silent, digital wars continued in the shadows. Specialist Anna Morgan, or whatever name she used now, was out there somewhere, a ghost in the world's machine, a silent guardian on a new wall. Her name was likely already forgotten by most at Fort Sheridan, replaced by the myth she had created. But her impact was permanent. She had taught them that the most powerful force in the world is not a weapon, but a standard. It is the unwavering standard of professionalism, the relentless pursuit of competence, and the quiet dignity of letting your actions speak for you. It is a legacy that does not fade, because it is not built on statues or plaques, but is forged in the character of those who carry the lesson forward. That is the true nature of the quiet professional. Their victory is not in the single, dramatic moment of vindication, but in the lasting, positive change that their example inspires in others. They prove that you don't need a loud voice to change the world. You just need the skill to do the job and the integrity to do it right. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where professional integrity defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.